Okay. So, so for everyone listening today, um, so a little bit about yourself, Sean. Nice to have you
me. Well,
here
my name is
today.
Sean. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me in. My name is Sean McQuillan. I work in the film industry, but this is my second time running now under the NDP in Vancouver South. I have a childcare nonprofit where I am building childcare spaces for people who work outside of 9 to 5. And that's kind of been a bit of spearhead after having 2 children of my own. It's something I realized that there was no options available for people who work outside of 9 to 5. So it's been something really passionate about that I've been working on. But I decided to run initially because I joined a union, got benefits, and I asked myself why everyone didn't have those benefits. Why don't we have pharma care? Why don't we have dental coverage, eye care, all that stuff? And that kind of led me down that path. And working with the Minister of Childcare in BC, who is a BC NDP minister, she kind of helped guide me and meet people and check meets. And I decided that this is kind of the route I wanted to go. Oh, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Okay, so as I understand, you had run for office previously in 2019. So what's motivating you in particular to run again? Like, what's driving you to go at it again?
Well, well, nothing's changed. You know, it's only been 2 years, and the things that I've been passionate about, I've not seen being accomplished by a Liberal government. And I'm looking at what society's issues are, what the problems of people in Vancouver South are. I don't see meaningful change. I see a lot of the same things happening again and again, and a lot of, large announcements of monetary amounts, but it's not really amounts of money that you spend, it's how you use it. And I'm finding from my just experiences in the riding, from viewing politics as a whole, I'm not seeing progress where we need to. And I find there's a lot of things that require more immediate action than we're getting, such as climate change. We had the IPCC report a couple of weeks ago. Our current goals of net zero for 2050 are, it's not soon enough. And then I can even go into how we calculate net zero doesn't actually make sense for reducing emissions. And that's something I can go into altogether as well. But I'm concerned. I'm concerned because I have children, and I don't see meaningful action soon enough for both myself and for all future generations. And what makes me run is I want to think long term. I see a lot of people looking at elections cycles, looking, the next 4 years, but I want to look at the next 7 generations. It's very important to me. And so that's really what's got me down this path.
I see. And what's driving, your decision to run for the NDP? What is it about the NDP that you see meeting with this idea of progress that you're not seeing from the current government right now?
I'm finding with the NDP, they're people powered. They're people first, and they have the interests of people. And I'm looking at where money goes in government, where subsidies are given, where, how the wealth and wage inequality that exists in the world is only getting more exasperated as time goes on. And I'm finding the NDP is the only one that wants to, single-handedly object that, change it, switch where we're putting our subsidies, put people first, make sure the basics are covered for everybody. That's sometimes extreme ideas such as like a guaranteed livable basic income, which I've spoken with Leah Ganson, MP in Winnipeg Centre. She had motion 58, which was something where she tried to introduce it in the House of Commons in the previous sitting of Parliament. Of course, as a private member's bill, it was swiftly shut down. But I think we need to be bold in our actions. And I'm finding a lot of the things coming from the NDP. You've got Peter Julian doing a pharmacare bill. You've got Don Davies stepping up in so many different ways as a health critic here. And I find them as people are the ones I feel myself reflected in the most. And I think that's a group I really want to be a part of.
Yeah, and speaking of policies, I mean, how do you reconcile the differences between provincial level NDP parties and the federal platform, the federal ideas? Do you view them as a continuum? Do you view them as the same? Like, how do you navigate that? Because, for example, there's the environment, like right now, the issue of old growth logging and those sort of disagreements.
Mhm.
How are you navigating those? Have those come up in your campaigning?
Well, I'm a member of a union, and I will tell you that any group, you're going to have people in different camps. You're going to have people from different backgrounds of life, different ideologies, and where to go. And the BC NDP, I know so many strong MLAs. A lot of people I really respect within the BC NDP that I know are working towards fixing some things along that line when it comes to local growth logging. But it is a larger group, and there's a lot of work to be done internally. And I find even that same with the federal NDP. Now, so I look to other MPs like Matthew Green out east in Hamilton, Ontario, people that I think are speaking on the things that I truly believe in and want to work towards. And so, like a group, like a union, a political party really needs to be steered by people of similar mindsets. And so I find the NDP right now is in a fantastic, specifically federally, point where they are evolving into a far more progressive place than they have been in the past. And I believe with Jagmeet Singh as a leader, he's someone who can push and continue to help us go along that path. You know, everything requires political will, and it requires the will of the people who make up the party itself, the leader, and the people who get elected as members of parliament. And with the BC NDP, it's a similar situation. I know there's a lot of people that want to be steering the BC NDP in a certain way so that it can grow into a much more progressive place. I respect many of the MLAs in there. And for me, when it comes to things like old growth, I'm saying, well, we need to immediately start looking at alternatives. You know, we have second and third growth forests. And our current infrastructure for forestry in British Columbia is based off gigantic trees. Our machinery, everything is based off of cutting down large trees. That's what we've had in abundance. But we need to put massive investments into making sure that we make second and third growth forests far more viable, and also look into alternatives such as hemp. Because if we are only looking at what we currently have and saying, well, we got to do it because this is all we got, that's not pushing for far enough. I find that's what happens generally in government. We work from where we are. And I think we need to always work from where we're going, and that requires vision. And I don't often see that. And so I'm looking to other people who I see have vision, and I'm aligning myself with them, and I'm creating my own vision to follow as well. Oh, you're muted again. Still don't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
There we go. Yeah.
Yep. So, and speaking of your vision, and you're talking about, you know, these changes, how, you know, BC is you know, highly dependent on resource extraction, and talking about moving the NDP in a progressive direction. Like, how does the progressive direction fit with the working class? Because there has always been this sort of tension between the progressive side and working class. It's something that's come up in many countries where parties have moved in a progressive direction, yet they've been over time, for various reasons, losing touch with their working class base. How can the NDP, you know, prevent that kind of drift and stay aligned, you know, with what it claims that it's aligned with working class people?
Well, this is great because both being a member of the labor movement, and I'm from Alberta originally. I'm from where oil and gas is king. And I can tell you at the end of the day, it is not about the product. Nobody is in love with oil and gas. They're in love with providing a good living for their family. That's what they desire. They desire to be able to have a job where they have protections, have a job where they're able to earn, good living. And I find when you're working towards those progressive policies, you have to involve working class, because you have to make sure people aren't pushed into poverty. You need to have jobs that are available. You need to have, skill sets being advanced. You can't just say, okay, we're going to push to this and leave everyone behind. Only when you work with them simultaneously are you going to get a transition that actually benefits all people. And so when we are looking to things like transitioning to green energy and things like that in Canada, it has to be with all of the working class in alignment with it. It's not oil and gas they're in love with. it's a good living. And if we can provide jobs with equally or greater good living, I don't think there's going to be an issue.
So, in your personal view, whether or not it is in exact alignment with the NDP platform, what would you say, in your words, are your biggest policy concerns presently?
Well, it's interesting because there's a lot of things that affect both like Canada-wide and locally that are important to me. For me, number one is always going to be wage and wealth inequality. I find the majority of issues in society stem from wage and wealth inequality, and that needs to be addressed, and addressed really quickly in Canada, because everyone says eventually, 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 but the longer we drag our feet, the worse it's going to get, and the more we won't know where it's gone. You know, if we have policies for, wealth taxes that might come in 10 years, well, that gives them 10 years to find ways to hide money. And I think we need to be bold with this and bold with it fast before this gap gets any larger. And that's something I think there's a lot of different avenues to go that way. And, that goes to affordable housing as well, because with affordable housing, you're not supposed to be spending more than 25% of your income on housing. This was all done in research studies from the 30s and updated up to the 90s. And yet that number that they officially say has now increased to 30%, has increased to 40%, because they know that 25% isn't possible when wages haven't kept up with the cost of living. And that comes from corporate wage suppression. That comes from using housing as a investment, and this consistent investimization of housing. 20% of housing in Canada is owned by corporations and REITs, which are corporately mandated to show profits. So they want the cost to go up so they can always show profits for their shareholders. We can't have housing as an investment. It is a need for people. So we need to be really strict with it. We need to control how housing is distributed as much as anything else, so that the costs are kept down so that people can afford it. And I'm talking about ownership alongside rental units. If you earn the median income, you should be able to afford a house, and that's it. But the truth is, no one earning the median income in major cities can afford a house. It's just not viable. And then, continuing on, man, I've got so many things to talk about. I hope you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
I really, of course, please. I'm so sorry, but it's like, these are things that really have got me going and why I'm here. And it's, the climate problem, like I've mentioned it before, climate change. We're due for a 1.5 to 2 degrees increase in global temperatures by 2050. And yet all of our target dates are still 2050 and are still using our current net zero calculators, where we literally pay poorer countries to use carbon offsets so they can pollute less, so that we can pollute more. That's an actual thing that we do. And then also, we don't calculate our exporting raw fossil fuels part of our total. So like, we're still increasing our amount of fossil fuel, geez, I'm blanking here, of CO2 levels and everything from that. But because we're creatively accounting it, it makes it seem like we're not. And so we need to actually be really realistic about what we're doing on that. And I find you're not paying attention to that. They're just going, you know what, this is a nice buzzword, net zero, but what does that even mean to the way we're actually emitting? Because the total emissions are not going down. We're just being creative with the accounting. And then locally, it's like, I really want to solve the drug crisis. It's only gotten worse under Liberals and Conservative governments. And I did a town hall recently with some drug policy experts, and we need to look into decriminalization. We need to look into safe supply, because right now we are losing 25 people a day in British Columbia. And like, people are dying en masse. It's far worse than the death rate of COVID. And yet, because it's something taboo or something outside of society, people just kind of brush it off to the side. So it's something where it's really gotten me passionate. And I'm a person that if I'm going to say something, I want to do it. And I've really looked at the voting records in the House of Commons as of late. And what happens is the Liberals and Conservatives are voting the same on a lot of major topics, despite, campaigning differently. And so I'm watching. The reason, again, I align myself with the NDP is because what they campaign on, they vote on. And I like that. And that kind of honesty and that kind of work is why I'm doing what I'm doing.
I see. And related to that question, so Canada's political system is characterized by a powerful party whip that keeps MPs in close alignment with one another and the leadership. So if you're elected as MP from Vancouver South, what would you do in the event of a disagreement with the NDP?
Well, I will say the NDP does have a little bit of leeway. There is precedence for members of parliament to abstain, morally abstain from things, to be able to vocalize internally. There is room for that, the NDP a bit. It's not, they're whipped, but not in that way. Like they try and make sure that we're all on the same page going into something, but we internally are a lot more open about the dialogue of things are going. But one big thing that will help fix that is electoral reform. We need electoral reform in Canada. First past the post is not something that is really doing us any favors. And right now, the only alternative that I hear from the Liberal government is instant, IRV. It's like instant rank voting, or you go off. It's like a list here. But sorry, 1 second. Okay, can you pause for 1 second?
Sure.
I'm just at work.
It's okay. We're back on.
So electoral reform is something that I really believe in on this. And there's a lot of different systems that we can look into. Mixed member proportional representation is probably the most popular. It's in New Zealand. But I would look at some other systems as well. Dual member. When you get to actually vote for two different people in an area. I want representation. I want people's votes to matter. And I think a lot of time people are scared and pushed into voting for, one of the two major parties. And I hear that a lot door knocking. Well, I'm afraid of the Conservatives, so I'm going to vote Liberal. But how is that representation? I don't think that is realistic. So I find the NDP are the only ones aside from maybe the Greens, are the only ones talking about changing the electoral system and changing it in a way that actually is more fair for representation. And I think that allows people's voices to be better heard overall.
So speaking of electoral reform, how would you make that into, and the NDP, how would you make that into a more salient issue? Because while it's come up before as an issue, and of course there's Trudeau's promise of this would be the last election in 2015 under first past the post, but like as an issue, it appears that there seems to be a disconnect, as in it being a top priority in online discussion, but doesn't seem to translate at the ballot box. Because as you know, there was BC's referendum on it, which failed, the electoral reform referendum. So how does this issue become more at the forefront? Because I know that it's an issue that definitely comes up, but go ahead.
Yeah, BC's referendum was, I hate to say this, it was poorly done. It just, the wording was not done in such a way that people understood. And I think what we need across the country in most things, we're finding grassroots really is where the pressure comes. I think people need to start really banding together and saying, listen, there's the example in other countries. We're one of the last countries to really be running first past the post in this way. And it's just not really, when we're not a two-party system, we're not. It's not giving people equal voices. We've got, political parties earning large percentages of the vote and very small number of seats because it's just set up that way. So I think I think that needs to come from a grassroots level more than anything else. And I think that grassroots level can connect to a specific party to make it happen. And this is a snap election. So I don't know if that happened for this election, but I think this is something that needs to be built up over time, possibly for the next one.
Yeah, and in terms of connecting with voters at the grassroots level, you had mentioned that when you're talking about electoral reform, there's the issue of, from the NDP's perspective of, the NDP to Liberal voter, someone who might be afraid of a Conservative government, forming if they don't vote for the Liberals, or, the vote splitting arguments. Which is a common argument, Related to that, I would like to ask you, like, how are you trying to appeal to voters on the right? Because I think that is also an important constituency, especially in the NDP's traditional territory. I mean, Saskatchewan, the NDP conservative voter, that other side of the discussion, which I don't see being discussed very often compared to the the NDP liberal voter.
That's a totally fair point. I think we've had, at least, I'm 35, at least as long as I've been alive, we've had some fantastic marketing by the two governing parties that makes the Conservative Party the one for, the working class, when in fact they aren't, or the ones for religious people, which in fact they aren't. It's like, it's so strange to me that that is the path, and they've got the marketing machine down, that people say, wow, if I vote for these guys, these are the ones that are going to improve my life. When in policy and how they vote in the House of Commons has shown time and time again, corporate interests are way ahead of that. It's so, like, it's very easy to see when you lay it out. And I think really strategically, what should be happening is it should be explained. It should be explained much better, but getting that across when people have essentially attached themselves to one party or another is a difficult task, but it is something that needs to be done to connect to people. And I think, when I've talked to people knocking on doors, I ask them why. Why are you voting Conservative? And, like, if I had enough time to talk to everyone in the bloody riding, I think I would definitely make a big difference. But it's, a lot of them don't know why, or they think they are saying so for a single issue, or they're saying so for an issue they think is represented by the Conservatives. But when I talk to them, they go, oh, actually, it isn't. And here's the record. Here's the voting record. Here's how I can show you what's going on. And I think that kind of work, that hard, grueling, connecting with each and every individual person, that kind of work is difficult and not done enough. Because, well, we live in a society where I work in the film industry. I work 12 to 15-hour days. I work 60 to 70-hour weeks to provide for my family. There's only so many hours in the day for me to go talk to people. There's only so many hours in the day for a lot of people to talk, because they're also at work. So when are they going to make time to listen to some guy that shows up on their door? That's the real difficulty, is finding ways to connect to people and say, let's talk about what is affecting your life, what you would like to change, and I will tell you how we plan to do something about it.
Yeah, so that segues into my next question really well, which is, going from grassroots to really that online space where politics has become pretty dominant. So, I mean, there's that concern that the political parties, especially on the left, I think there's been a concern that's been voiced, is that they've become overly online, focusing too much on Twitter politics that involve a small yet vocal group of highly politically engaged voices. So as you were talking about this kind of grassroots movement, reaching people on the ground. So what are the ways that you find to be the most effective at reaching past that disconnect, these sort of barriers and bubbles that we've all kind of collectively set up?
So are you saying what's the best way to connect from that disconnect, online or on the ground?
On the ground or online, the bubbles that have formed, and how you can effectively connect with potential voters on the ground, or even online as well.
Well, it's funny because I'll tell you both then. So it's interesting because technology is constantly changing. You've got your Twitter sphere of all your individual political parties that are echo chambers for this is how things are and that's how things are. And you learn a lot off there. You engage with some people. That's great. Don't waste all your time on there. With the younger generation, I'm really surprised at how effective TikToks are. I know Jugmeat gets a lot of slack for that, but I'm on there. And I've literally had people in my riding contact me on there saying, hey, I see you on here. I like what you're talking about. I live here and here and here. I'll take a sign. I'll tell my neighbors, let's go. And I've only been on it for 2 months. It's amazing because there's new platforms are constantly changing where people are going, you know what? I'm tired of being on Facebook. I'm tired of being on this. And like it's always evolving and changing in different ways. So that's, for a lot of the younger generations, that's a fantastic, fantastic way to connect. But on the ground, there is some difficulties because people are working a lot. You can knock on 300 doors and 10 will answer. So I'm often put myself in the community. I go to the grocery stores. I go to the, it's difficult with COVID, but we're doing what we can with COVID regulations. And I stand there and I say, hi, come talk to me. Some people definitely do not want to talk, but, a lot of the times go, you know what? I haven't really thought about this. Let's talk. And I will have a conversation, and I'll say, you know what, if you're pressed for time, here's connect to the media I do have online, but right now in front of me, tell me what's important to you. And I'll tell you what I think about it, but better yet, you tell me what you think about it, and let's come up with solutions together. Because I'm of the opinion everybody knows something I don't. I can only know so much, but every single person in the world knows at least one thing I don't, and I have something to learn from them. And if I don't have the best idea on how to solve something, I will take the best idea in the room. And I think that collaboration, that needs to be constant, and it's always going to evolve and change. And I think in the community, you've got community leaders to talk to, you've got locations to stand at, but it is different in the modern world because people aren't home, people are tired, and it's really finding those ways to connect is it's going to be an ever battle.
And relating to that, you've said on your webpage on the NDP website that you strive for that common sense policy making that involves working with experts and also listening to people's lived experiences. So, if you're elected as an MP from this riding, like what would that look like?
Well, Vancouver South is. Sorry, go ahead. I didn't want to.
Yes. So what would that look like?
Well, with Vancouver South, we actually have one of the most diverse ridings in Vancouver. It's great. And I find a lot of people in different cultural groups don't feel heard. And so I would want to initially create basically like community ambassadors, people who speak all of the local languages, to be the points of contact for different groups, so that even if English isn't your strong point, you have someone you can come to, and they will come to me. And if they even want to just come to me directly with a translator, if I don't speak the language, let's do that. I find there is a lot of there's a lot of barriers, and a lot of that is time. Time is a huge barrier. So setting up different options for different people, it's a modern world. You have to be very flexible. If your office hours are 9 to 5, just like if your childcare is 9 to 5, that doesn't work for everybody. So you have to find alternatives to allow people in, to bring them in, because otherwise they just feel disenfranchised. There's no point in participating at all. And Canada still has low voter turnout. That's another thing we don't talk about enough. We have really low voter turnout. And so it's a very small group of people that decide big decisions for everyone else because of the fatigue. And that fatigue can be political fatigue, that can be daily life fatigue, and just finding ways to kind of make it easy, make it inviting, make it warm, because a lot of politics is aggressive and angry, and I think there's room for much kinder, better way to do it.
Yeah. So as you're saying, this Vancouver South is a very diverse riding, stretching from Cambie on the west side to Boundary on the other. So about that, when you're talking about reaching out to different communities, how do you ensure that you stay on message and keep your message the same across these different languages? Because that is an issue that has come up where MPs or their representatives may say one thing in another language or a different thing in another language. So keeping on message. How do you ensure that you stay on message across different languages?
Well, internally, staying on message is, being true to yourself. So, but your communication to other languages, that's actually something that I think you need to, when you're selecting people to work with you, they know what you're about as much as anything else. You need people who are passionate, who are understanding of you. And if they can't communicate it, then there'll have to be different ways to translate directly, because some things are lost in translation. When I'm saying I'm going to solve the drug crisis, I'm not saying I'm going to like up our CMP and Vancouver police presence to crack down on all the people using drugs. The contrary, I'm going to take the criminal aspect out of it, listen to the experts, and find ways to make sure that we are stopping the criminal supply, but not punishing those who are trapped in this system of using. And so I think there's some things that are lost in that translation. And you're right, it's going to have to take work. And if once or twice it gets mistaken, then you have to correct it. And it's that simple. And I think it's just that consistency, the readjusting, and the understanding. And some people will disagree with you, and that's fine. But you just have to be true to your own message and listen to other people's perspectives on it, because they might know something, like I said, that you don't. And maybe that new information can change your message into something that is more suited for everyone.
Okay, thanks for that response. And what will be your role in the NDP caucus if you're elected?
I've thought of a couple spots. I mean, it's funny. I do work in the film industry, and it is one of the larger industries that has no representation politically, provincially, or federally. And it is yet a huge economic boost for our country. Like, it's actually in the billions of dollars in British Columbia, and I think there's a lot of work there. But my passions kind of tend to lie towards into housing policy and working in that. That's the thing I research the most, more than anything, because I believe that we need to really restructure housing, or it's going to continue out of control. And I think there's a couple of spots for me. I think we'll see what is not fulfilled and go from there. I have some longer term goals and places I want to be, but I'm very permeable at the beginning.
Yeah, and if the NDP are in the opposition, as in the official opposition, like, what sort of role do you see yourself taking in that role?
We'll find out about that. I'm not entirely, like I said, I've got a couple spots. I'm gonna worry about getting elected.
Yeah, well, that's the job.
Right. I have a lot of places I can sit. I'm very fortunate that my skill set is varied.
What was the last thing? Yeah,
What
sorry,
was
it
that?
skipped. Sorry, it skipped.
It's good.
Though.
Oh, I just said I'm very fortunate that I have a varied skill set, so I have a few places I can sit, and that's really going to determine, really based on who else is in as well. That's what happens when you're a new MP.
Yeah. So that's all the time we have today.
Okay.
So it's nice talking to you, Sean, and best of luck with your campaign. And everyone, remember to vote. Exercise your right to vote. And,
vote early and vote often.
Yep. Well, vote once.
It's a joke. Everyone says that. Vote early and vote often. It's a joke. But I thank you so much for having me here. I really just want to get it across that it's something where we have been making the same decision over and over again, and I don't see the progress that we need on a lot of major issues. And I believe that it could be a time to strategically vote NDP to change those things. And I hope that people are able to hear the message in a very short period of time and know that there are some very passionate people behind it. And that's why I'm with them. It's the people more than anything else. And I hope that everyone can connect to them so that they can be best represented by people who are just like them.
Thanks, Sean. And that is all.